Emma stood in my hotel doorway at midnight, barefoot, still in her presentation dress. "Can't sleep," she said, holding 2 bottles of water like a peace offering. 3 weeks we'd been pretending that blind date never happened. I should have sent her back to her room. Instead, I let her in. She curled into the armchair while I sat on the bed's edge close enough to catch her perfume, far enough to keep lying to ourselves. "This is probably a mistake," she whispered at 2 a.m., but her fingers had already found my collar. "Tell me to stop," I said. She leaned closer. "I don't want to stop. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today." It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I hadn't planned on spending my Thursday evening staring into the bottom of a whiskey glass, wondering how I'd managed to rack up 3 dating disasters in as many months. But there I was, 15 minutes early at Vare, one of those wine bars where even the bartenders wore suits and every surface gleamed like polished midnight. My sister Jenny's voice echoed in my head from our call earlier. "Trust me on this one. She's perfect for you, smart, driven, works in finance." I told her to wear emerald so you'd spot her right away. I adjusted my tie for the 100th time, second-guessing the charcoal suit I'd chosen. The last blind date Jenny set me up with had been a catastrophe, an aspiring Instagram influencer who spent 2 hours talking about her skincare routine. Before that was the yoga instructor who insisted Mercury's retrograde was the reason for all my blocked chakras. And let's not discuss the vegan chef who lectured me about the moral implications of honey. The bartender topped off my whiskey with practiced precision. "Waiting for someone?" he asked, polishing a wine glass that already looked immaculate. "Blind date," I admitted, checking my watch. "Still 10 minutes early." My sister's determined to end my supposedly tragic single status. He smiled knowingly and drifted away to help another patron. I took another sip, letting the whiskey warm my throat while reviewing Jenny's intel one more time. Finance professional. Friend of a friend. Emerald dress. Simple enough. That's when I heard it. A laugh that tugged at my memory, bright and musical, but somehow familiar. My eyes tracked the source before my brain could place it. A woman at the far end of the bar, her back turned to me, wearing a dress that caught the dim lighting in deep green waves. My heart stumbled. No, it couldn't be. She turned, probably sensing my stare, and time seemed to crystallize into one impossible moment. Emma Valencourt, senior accounting analyst from my own department. The brilliant mind who regularly challenged my quarterly projections with razor-sharp precision and somehow always managed to be right. Her hand froze halfway between us in what started as a professional reflex for a handshake, but now hung awkwardly in the space between colleague and whatever this was supposed to be. I watched recognition dawn in those warm brown eyes I'd only ever seen across conference room tables. "Mr. Harrison," she managed, her professional mask slipping just enough to show the shock underneath. "Emma," I replied, my voice rougher than Kamnan. "Intended." The whiskey suddenly felt like a mistake. We stood there, locked in that moment of mutual recognition, while the bar's other patrons began to take notice of our strange tableau. Emma's silver bird earrings caught the light as she tilted her head, studying me with the same analytical focus she usually reserved for spreadsheets. I noticed her trying to discreetly check her phone, probably comparing details she'd been given about her date. I could almost see her mind working through the same calculations running through mine. Jenny's friend Sarah worked in HR. Sarah knew Emma from some charity committee. The connections lined up with terrible clarity. "I believe," Emma said carefully, her professional tone at odds with the faint color rising in her cheeks, "we may have been set up." A couple at a nearby table was openly watching now, probably hoping for some romantic comedy moment to unfold. Instead, we stood there like two people who'd rehearsed entirely different plays only to find themselves on stage together. I became acutely aware of how this must look. Department director and senior analyst meeting in a wine bar, both dressed for a date. The implications could be problematic, to say the least. The weight of our professional roles pressed against this accidental intimate moment. Emma's hand finally dropped, and she smoothed her dress in a gesture I recognized from pre-presentation. Nervous habits. We should probably. I started, just as she began. Perhaps we need to. We both stopped. The bartender raised an eyebrow in our direction, clearly sensing the tension but misreading its nature entirely. The elegant space suddenly felt too warm, too close. Other patrons continued to steal glances, and I could feel our window for handling this gracefully starting to close. We needed to make a decision, fast. Emma's fingers curled around her wine glass, her usual boardroom confidence wavering. "We should probably leave," she said softly, gesturing toward the door. The flush spreading across her cheeks made her look younger, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her in our budget meetings. I noticed her hand trembling slightly against the stem of her glass, and something shifted in my chest. This wasn't the same woman who fearlessly challenged my projections with laser-precise analysis. This was someone else, someone real and uncertain and surprisingly human. Before I could second-guess myself, I pulled out the chair across from her. "We're already here," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "And honestly, I've always wondered about the person behind those brilliant meeting insights." Emma blinked, her lips parting in surprise. "Are you sure that's appropriate?" Nothing about this situation is appropriate," I admitted with a small laugh. "But it's just dinner. We're both adults who happen to be set up by well-meaning friends who clearly didn't do their homework." She studied me for a long moment, then slowly sank into the offered chair. "I almost canceled 3 times today," she confessed, smoothing her napkin with practiced precision. "Really? My sister's been hounding me about this setup for weeks." Wouldn't take no for an answer. Sarah was the same way. Emma's smile was tentative but genuine. She kept saying I needed to meet this amazing guy who'd appreciate my, how did she put it? Intimidating brain. The waiter appeared, and we ordered appetizers, a cheese board to share. The conversation started stiffly, both of us hyper-aware of our usual professional dynamic. But somewhere between the manchego and the aged cheddar, something shifted. "Wait," Emma said, leaning forward. "You've actually seen The Seventh Seal? Most people just pretend they have. Death playing chess on the beach? It's a classic. Though I prefer Wild Strawberries if we're talking Bergman." Her eyes lit up. "The dream sequences in that film are incredible. Have you seen?" Before we knew it, we were ordering dinner, trading stories about pretentious coffee shops and terrible first dates. Emma told me about a barista who insisted on calling her drinks potions and wouldn't serve her until she played along. I shared my experience with a cafe that served coffee in mason jars balanced on vintage books. "They ruined a first edition Hemingway," I said, making her laugh, a real laugh, not the polite one from meetings. "Speaking of terrible ideas," Emma said, twirling pasta on her fork, "I once dated a guy who thought it would be romantic to recreate the pottery scene from Ghost on our 3rd date. No, yes, complete with Unchained Melody playing on his phone. The clay ended up everywhere. I was finding it in my hair for days. As the evening progressed, I found myself noticing things I'd never allowed myself to see before. The way..." Her eyes crinkled when she smiled genuinely. How she unconsciously organized her bread plate by size of crumb. The subtle perfume that reminded me of rain. The professional walls didn't exactly crumble, but they lowered enough to let us glimpse the people behind our office personas. Emma was wickedly funny when she relaxed, with a dry wit that caught me off guard more than once. When the check came, we split it without discussion, both aware of keeping things above board. The walk to her car felt different from our usual. Elevator encounters, the night air soft with early summer warmth. Emma paused at her car door, keys in hand. For a moment, something hung in the air between us. Possibility, maybe, or complication. Probably both. "I should remind you," she said, her professional tone slipping back into place like armor. "I have that budget report due Monday." And just like that, the walls went back up. The reminder of our actual relationship, director and analyst, cleared the evening's warm haze like a splash of cold water. "Of course," I replied, stepping back slightly. "I'll see you at the morning meeting." My usual black coffee sat on my desk, steam still rising in delicate wisps against the Monday morning light. No note, no explanation, just the perfect temperature. Dark roast in my preferred cup from the break room, the one with the chip on the handle. You know those moments when a simple gesture says everything you're both trying not to say? This was one of those. I settled into my chair, touching the warm ceramic and remembering how Emma had once commented in a budget meeting that the office could save $12,000 annually by switching to a different coffee service. She'd known the exact brand I preferred, apparently, because this definitely wasn't from our usual supply. The morning meeting started at 9 o'clock sharp. I'd barely taken my seat at the head of the conference table when Emma walked in, 5 minutes after me, breaking her usual pattern of being precisely 7 minutes early. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before choosing a seat across the table, not her typical spot 2 chairs down on my right. "Good morning, everyone," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral as I opened my laptop. "Let's review the quarterly projections." The familiar rhythm of numbers and strategies should have been comforting, but everything felt slightly off-kilter. When we reached the marketing budget discussion, Emma cleared her throat softly. "I have some concerns about the allocation," she said, her voice more measured than usual. Gone was her characteristic directness, replaced by something almost cautious. "Perhaps we could consider adjusting the digital spend?" I caught Mark from sales giving us an odd look. Of course, word travels fast in our industry. Someone must have seen us at the wine bar. The Chicago financial district was too small for secrets. "Valid point," I responded, matching her professional tone. "What adjustments would you suggest?" The meeting continued like this, a careful dance of formality that felt more conspicuous than our usual dynamic. Every time Emma spoke, I noticed Sarah from Human Resources watching us with poorly concealed interest. Even Tom, who usually dozed through morning meetings, seemed unusually alert. When lunch hour arrived, I found myself glancing at my phone more often than I'd care to admit. Emma usually took her break at 12:30, something I'd never actively noticed until I watched her empty chair through my office window at 12:45. Then 1 o'clock. Then 1-15. The message notification sound made me jump slightly, but it was just my sister. How was the blind date? "She's amazing." Right? I left it unanswered. The afternoon developed its own strange choreography. We'd perfected the art of nearly crossing paths without actually meeting. I'd exit the break room just as she entered, or she'd round one corner as I turned down another hallway. Each near miss felt deliberate, calculated, and somehow more noticeable than if we'd just acted normally. "The Thompson report needs your signature," my assistant mentioned around 4 o'clock. Emma brought it up earlier, but said she'd come back when you weren't on a call. I wasn't on any calls. By 6 o'clock, most of the office had cleared out. I should have left too, but found myself reviewing the same budget reports for the 3rd time, not really seeing the numbers. Through my office window, I could see Emma's desk light still glowing, her silhouette bent over what was probably the perfectly organized spreadsheet she'd have ready for tomorrow's follow-up meeting. We were both working late, and we both knew why. The quiet hum of the office at night usually helped me think, but tonight it just emphasized everything we weren't saying. That coffee this morning, it was an acknowledgement, maybe even an apology, or a goodbye to whatever might have started over shared cheese and Bergman films. I glanced at my phone again. No messages. Outside my window, Emma's desk lamp continued its quiet vigil. Neither of us ready to be the first to leave. Tuesday morning brought the kind of announcement that shifts the ground beneath your feet. Richard, our CEO, stood at the front of the conference room, beaming like he'd just solved world hunger. "I'm thrilled to welcome back Marcus Torres Wellington from our Singapore office," he announced to the gathered all-hands meeting. "His exceptional work abroad has earned him a permanent position here as our new senior operations manager." I knew Marcus from previous projects, the kind of person who collected relationships like trading cards. Watching him work a room was like watching a masterclass in corporate networking, all perfect white teeth and carefully calculated charm. He'd breeze through conversations, leaving people feeling special while subtly gathering intel he'd use later for advancement. The welcome lunch in the break room felt more like a coronation. Marcus held court near the catering spread, designer watch catching the fluorescent lights as he gestured. I hung back, nursing my coffee, watching him work the crowd. Then he spotted Emma. Claire. His voice carried across the room, using her middle name with manufactured familiarity. Singapore wasn't the same without my favorite analyst. The way he touched her elbow while laughing at some private joke made my coffee taste bitter. Emma's spine straightened imperceptibly, her smile shifting into that professional mask I recognized from yesterday's awkward encounters. Her fingers tightened around her water bottle as Marcus leaned closer, sharing another apparently hilarious memory. You notice things when you're watching someone try not to be watched. The way Emma angled her body slightly away. How she kept the minimum socially acceptable distance between them. The careful placement of her laptop bag as a barrier. Later, I needed to make copies of the quarterly review documents, actual copies. Not just an excuse to move through the office. Emma was already at the machine, her shoulders tense as she sorted through papers. "Hey," I said quietly, keeping my tone casual. "Need any help?" She glanced around before speaking, voice low. "I should probably explain about Marcus." "You don't owe me any explanations," but I stayed, pretending to organize my files. "We dated for 2 years," she continued, eyes fixed on the copy machine's display. "It ended badly when I found out I wasn't the only colleague he was involved with." The paper in my hands crinkled slightly. I smoothed it carefully, maintaining that professional distance we'd perfected. "I'm sorry that happened to you. It was a long time ago." Emma straightened a pile of copies with precise movements. I thought you should know." Before I could respond, Marcus's voice boomed from the doorway. "Claire, I need your insights on the Singapore market projections." He crossed the small copy room in 2 strides, standing close enough that Emma had to step back against the machine. I watched her knuckles whiten around the stack of papers. My jaw clenched, but I kept my face neutral. Office politics required a delicate touch, especially with someone as calculating as Marcus. The quarterly review meeting that afternoon felt endless. Marcus dominated the conversation, peppering his presentations with casual references to his time with Emma in Chicago before Singapore. Each comment landed like a carefully placed dart, marking territory. I caught Thompson from legal raising his eyebrows at Walker from IT, even Sarah from HR. Shifted uncomfortably during one particularly pointed story about late-night budget sessions. When the meeting finally ended, I lingered to gather my materials, watching Marcus follow Emma toward the elevators. He caught up with her in 3 long strides, effectively trapping her in the corner by the water cooler. His voice dropped to that intimate register that carried just far enough to mark possession while maintaining plausible deniability. "Remember that little Italian place on Halsted?" He leaned closer. "They still have our table." Emma's eyes darted toward the exit, but Marcus's arm blocked her path, casual but deliberate. Something in her expression made me move before I'd fully formed a plan. "Emma," I called out, striding over with purpose. "Sorry to interrupt, but I need those revised projections for the board meeting in 30 minutes. I held up my tablet meaningfully, though no such meeting existed. The relief in her eyes lasted just a moment too long. Marcus stepped back, all professional courtesy on the surface. "Don't let me keep you from deadlines, Claire." His smile didn't reach his eyes. I felt Thompson, Walker, and Sarah watching this little drama unfold. Office gossip would have fresh fuel by morning, but right then, I couldn't bring myself to care. Emma gathered her papers quickly. "I'll have those numbers to you right away," she said, voice steady but slightly too loud. 3 weeks passed in. A delicate dance of professional avoidance, and suddenly we were all heading to Chicago. The autumn conference was a major industry event, with 5 of us representing the company: myself, Emma, Marcus, and 2 senior partners. The morning flight found Emma 3 rows ahead of me, her honey blonde hair caught in its usual work bun. I pretended to review my presentation notes while watching her thumb through a photography magazine. She'd mentioned her interest in urban landscapes during our dinner, but I pushed that memory aside. Professional distance was safer. The Drake hotel lobby gleamed with old-world elegance, all polished brass and crystal chandeliers. As our group checked in, I couldn't help noticing Emma and I were assigned to the same floor. Marcus, thankfully, was 2 floors above. Room 842, the clerk announced, sliding my keycard across the marble counter. And Miss Valancourt, you're in 836. Emma's eyes met mine briefly before she looked away, adjusting her laptop bag. 6 doors between us. I wondered if the universe was laughing. The first day of presentations went smoothly. I watched from the back of the grand ballroom as Emma commanded attention during the financial forecasting panel. Her insights were razor-sharp, earning appreciative nods from industry veterans. She had this way of challenging assumptions that made people thank her for proving them wrong. "Your analyst is impressive," Gerald Matthews from Mitchell & Ross whispered to me during a coffee break. "We could use that kind of clarity in our Chicago office." I felt an irrational surge of protectiveness. She's essential to our team. The team dinner that evening was at Gibson's Steakhouse, where Marcus held court at the center of the long table. He'd positioned himself directly across from Emma, turning every group conversation into an opportunity to reminisce about their past. "Remember that client meeting in Milwaukee?" He topped off Emma's wine glass without asking. "You saved my presentation with that brilliant cost analysis." Emma's smile remained professional, but I noticed her fingers drumming softly against the paille tablecloth. The wine flowed freely as evening stretched on, Marcus's stories becoming increasingly personal. I watched him lean closer with each anecdote, his cologne probably overwhelming Emma's subtle perfume, the one I'd caught hints of during our wine bar dinner around 10 o'clock. I pushed back from the table. "Early morning tomorrow." "Me too." "Review my keynote notes." Emma's glance held something like disappointment, quickly masked. Marcus immediately filled the conversational space I'd left, launching into another story about their shared past. Back in room 842, I spread my presentation materials across the king-sized bed. The notes blurred together as my mind wandered to dinner, the way Emma had shifted slightly toward me whenever Marcus's stories turned too intimate. As if seeking shelter. At 11, I heard the soft click of high heels in the hallway, followed by Emma's door closing. The sound somehow made the room feel emptier. I gave up on the notes around 11:30, switching to the local news with the volume low. Chicago's lights sparkled beyond my window, a sea of possibilities I couldn't explore. The walls shared with Emma's room remained quiet. Midnight crept in on silent feet. A gentle knock startled me from my thoughts. I muted the TV, wondering if I'd imagined it. The knock came again, barely more than a whisper against wood. Through the peephole, Emma stood in the hallway, still wearing her navy presentation dress, but barefoot now, her stockinged feet making her look oddly vulnerable. She held 2 bottles of water, hair falling loose around her shoulders where had been perfectly styled hours ago. I opened the door, keeping my voice low. "Everything okay?" "I saw your light under the door," she said, offering one of the water bottles. "Still working on tomorrow's keynote?" Her makeup had faded, dark eyes softer without their usual professional armor. A few strands of honey blonde hair curled against her neck where they'd escaped the day's confines. "Can't sleep," she continued, shifting her weight slightly. "Too wired from the presentations and the wine." A small laugh escaped her. Though I probably didn't need that last glass Marcus kept insisting on. The mention of his name hung between us like smoke. I noticed a slight tremor in her hand as she held the water bottle, remembered her fingers drumming against the tablecloth. "During dinner, want to come in?" I asked, then quickly added, "We could go over the morning schedule, make sure we're aligned on messaging." Emma settled into the cream-colored armchair by the window, tucking her feet beneath her. The city lights painted shifting patterns across her face as I perched on the edge of the king bed, maintaining a careful distance that felt both necessary and impossible. I haven't been back to Chicago since Dad's restaurant closed, she said softly, turning the water bottle between her palms. 2 years of begging him to update the books, modernize the system. I dumped my entire first year's salary into trying to save it. I watched her profile against the window. That must have been hard. The hardest part wasn't losing the money. It was watching him lose his dream. She traced a finger through the condensation on the bottle. He'd built that place from nothing, back when Lincoln Park was still rough around the edges. 30 years of 6-day weeks, and in the end, all it took was 6 months of bad luck and outdated accounting to bring it down. Is that why you went into finance? A small, sad smile crossed her lips. Partly. I wanted to understand the numbers that could destroy someone's life work. Make sure it never happened to anyone else I loved. The confession hung in the air between us, heavy with things unsaid. I found myself sharing my own fears before I could think better of it. My father was like that, devoted everything to the job. Died at his desk at 58, middle of a conference call. I hadn't told anyone this part before. Sometimes I catch myself checking my pulse after long meetings, wondering if I'm following the same path. Emma's eyes met mine, understanding, replacing their usual analytical sharpness. Is that why you keep your nephew's photo as your phone background? A reminder of what matters. You notice that? The question came out softer than intended. I notice lots of things, she admitted, pulling out her phone. Like how you drum your fingers when you're deep in thought. Or your Thursday Thai food. Ritual, always extra spring rolls. Heat crept up my neck. I didn't think anyone paid attention. Here, she said, opening Instagram and passing me her phone. Since we're sharing secrets. I scrolled through dozens of stunning urban photographs, stark geometries of steel and glass softened by morning light, reflected clouds turning skyscrapers into mirrors, empty subway platforms glowing like copper in the sunset. These are incredible. When do you? Lunch breaks, she smiled. I was going to study photography before practical considerations won out. Now it's my small rebellion against spreadsheets. The city hummed beyond our window, a gentle backdrop to confessions that felt both dangerous and inevitable. Every shared truth brought us closer to a line we couldn't uncross, but I couldn't stop myself from wanting to know more. What else do you notice? I asked, handing back her phone that our fingers brushed. Neither of us pulled away immediately. You're kinder than you need to be, she said quietly. In meetings, when someone's struggling with a presentation, you always find a way to help without making them feel small. It's rare in our industry. I thought about her own presentations, how she challenged ideas while protecting egos. Sounds like someone else I know. The conversation flowed easier after that, hours dissolving as we shared the stories that shaped us. She told me about her childhood ballet dreams, abandoned after a growth spurt at 13. I confessed about my engagement that ended 3 years ago when Sarah chose a position in London over our carefully planned future. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I noticed Emma's responses growing slower, her blinks lasting longer. She stood from the armchair, swaying slightly from exhaustion and lingering wine. I should go, she murmured, taking an unsteady step toward the door. I rose quickly, reaching out to steady her with both hands on her shoulders. The thin fabric of her dress did nothing to mask the warmth of her skin. And suddenly, the careful distance we'd maintained all night vanished. Her breath caught. My thumbs traced small circles against her shoulders without conscious permission. Time crystallized around us in that hotel room. My hand still resting on Emma's shoulders, her warmth seeping through the thin fabric of her dress. The city lights painted shadows across her face as she looked up at me, her expression a mix of desire and uncertainty that matched a war in my own chest. This is probably a mistake, Emma whispered, but her fingers found their way to my collar, playing with the fabric in a way that sent electricity down my spine. Her touch was hesitant, questioning, like she was giving herself permission one small movement at a time. If you want to stop, I managed, though everything in me hoped she wouldn't. Just say the word. The gentleness in my own voice surprised. She drew in a shaky breath, close enough now that I could feel it against my skin. I don't want to stop." The confession hung between us for one heartbeat, two, and then we were kissing. It was soft at first, exploring, her lips carrying the faintest trace of wine. My hand slid from her shoulders to cup her face, and she pressed closer, sighing into the kiss in a way that made me forget everything except how right this felt. We separated slowly, both a little dazed. Emma's eyes searched mine, reality creeping back into her expression. "What are we doing?" she whispered. "Our careers, the company policies." Her fingers tightened on my collar. "You're my direct supervisor. The power dynamic alone." "I know," I said, running my thumb along her cheekbone. She leaned into my palm, the gesture at odds with her worried words. "We could lose everything we've worked for." Her voice trembled slightly. "I've spent 2 years building my reputation on merit alone after Marcus." "Hey," I said softly, waiting until she met my eyes again. "We go as slow as you need. We're both adults who can make our own choices, but every step is something we decide together. Complete consent, no pressure, no expectations." Emma nodded, but neither of us moved apart. We stood there in the quiet hotel room, the sleeping city spread out beyond the windows, both aware that everything had shifted between us. Her hand moved from my collar to rest over my heart, and I wondered if she could feel how fast it was beating. "I should go," she said finally, though it took her another moment to step back. The loss of contact felt physical, like stepping from warmth into shadow. "Good night, Emma," I said, watching her move toward the door with steps that seemed deliberately measured. She paused with her hand on the doorknob, looking back over her shoulder. "Good night," she replied softly, and then she was gone, leaving me alone with the phantom sensation of her lips on mine. Sleep was impossible after that. I lay on top of the hotel bed, fully dressed, replaying every moment of our conversation. The way she'd curled into that armchair, sharing pieces of herself I suspected few people got to see. How her eyes had lit up showing me her photographs, that hidden artistic soul beneath the analyst's exterior. The slight tremor in her fingers against my collar, betraying that I wasn't the only one affected by our proximity. The hours crept by as Chicago slept around me. I watched shadows shift across the ceiling, remembering the exact pressure of her kiss, the soft sound she'd made when we connected. Dawn found me still awake, my thoughts circling between elation and anxiety. As the first pale light painted the sky in shades of pearl and rose-dot, so much had changed in a single night. One kiss had transformed everything, our careful professional distance, our daily interactions, the very ground we stood on. As the sun rose over Lake Michigan, I knew with absolute certainty that there was no going back to who we'd been before this moment. I turned toward the wall that separated our rooms, wondering if Emma had found sleep any easier than I had, if she too was watching the sunrise and thinking about that kiss that changed everything. The elevator doors opened Monday morning to reveal Marcus holding court by the coffee station, his voice carrying just loud enough to ensure an audience. I caught fragments as I passed, career advancement and special arrangements, while 2 junior analysts nodded along, their expressions caught between discomfort and curiosity. Emma sat ramrod straight at her desk, typing with precise, measured keystrokes that spoke volumes about her control. The steaming coffee I'd found on my desk that morning suddenly felt like evidence rather than kindness. I wanted to stop by her workspace, offer some gesture of support, but her carefully blank expression warned against it. The whispers grew throughout the week. I overheard Sarah and Jake, our newest analysts, discussing Emma's conference attendance by the printer. "I mean, she's brilliant," Sarah was saying, shuffling papers. "But you have to wonder if there were other factors. The presentations were impressive, though," Jake countered. But his tone carried that edge of doubt that makes innocent words dangerous. I cleared my throat as I rounded the corner, watching them startle and disperse. The urge to defend Emma, to shut down these conversations directly, burned in my chest. But any intervention would only feed the flames Marcus was so carefully tending. Thursday's partners meeting turned brutal in its subtlety. Emma delivered her quarterly analysis flawlessly, but during the follow-up discussion, Henderson from legal made a pointed comment about special relationships impacting objectivity in reporting structures. The words seemed to float above the conference table while Emma maintained her professional smile, though I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she gathered her papers afterward. I was heading to the break room when I heard it, a muffled sob from the rarely used executive bathroom. Emma's shoes were visible under the stall door. "Emma?" I kept my voice low, heart aching at the sound of her trying to steady her breathing. "I'm fine," she managed, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. "Please, I need a minute." I can talk to HR, I offered. "We can get ahead of this, shut down Marcus's no." The stall door opened, revealing Emma with reddened eyes but perfect posture. That's exactly what he wants. Any official complaint or intervention just validates the rumors. She dabbed at her makeup with precise movements. "I need to handle this myself." Later that evening, I found myself in a coffee shop 3 neighborhoods away, watching Emma stir her latte with mechanical precision. The distance from the office seemed to loosen something in her shoulders. "He's been texting," she said quietly, sliding her phone across the table. The messages from Marcus alternated between artificial warmth and veiled threats. "Miss our late night." Strategy sessions followed by "shame if the board questioned your rapid advancement." "This is harassment," I said, my jaw clenching. We should do nothing," Emma cut in, taking her phone back. "Any formal complaint means scrutiny." "Scrutiny means," she gestured between us, leaving the implications unspoken. The company gala loomed over us Friday night, mandatory attendance for senior staff. Emma traced the rim of her coffee cup, not meeting my eyes. "I could call in sick." "That would only fuel more gossip," I said gently. "Marcus would spin it as guilt or weakness." She nodded, knowing I was right. "So we go separately. Maintain professional distance. Leave early." "Exactly. Give them nothing to talk about." I resisted the urge to reach for her hand across the table, aware of other patrons even this far from our usual haunts. "We just have to outlast his games." Emma's smile carried a hint of her usual confidence. "I've survived worse than Marcus Torres Wellington's wounded ego." We lingered over our coffee until the baristas began closing procedures, discussing strategy for the gala in low voices. The city had grown dark around us, streetlights casting warm pools on the sidewalk as we finally emerged. We walked to our cars parked on different blocks, maintaining that careful distance that had become our new normal. I watched Emma's taillights disappear around the corner, remembering the vulnerability in her eyes in that bathroom, the steel in her spine as she pulled herself together. Marcus might have the upper hand in office politics, but he had underestimated her resilience. And mine. The gala was less than 24 hours away. We had our plan arrive separately, minimal interaction, early departures. Simple in theory. But nothing about this situation was simple anymore, and Marcus seemed determined to complicate it further. Emma took my breath away the moment she entered the gala ballroom. Her midnight blue dress caught the light like starlight on water, making me forget every carefully rehearsed plan about maintaining professional distance. I gripped my champagne flute tighter, forcing myself to look away. Through the crowd, I watched Marcus intercept her path to the balcony. His body language screamed possession as he leaned close, voice carrying just enough for nearby guests to hear fragments about our history and making things difficult. Emma's spine straightened, but I caught the slight tremor in her hand as she set down her glass. I'd had enough. The sight of her cornered, enduring his thinly veiled threats, snapped something loose in my chest. Without thinking through consequences, I crossed the room in long strides. Emma's eyes widened as I took her hand, her fingers instinctively tightening around mine. "Actually, Marcus," I said, loud enough to draw attention from the growing crowd of onlookers, "Emma and I are together. Anyone with concerns, professional or personal, can address them through proper HR channels." The last guests filtered out. Around 11 o'clock, leaving scattered champagne glasses and discarded name cards in their wake. Emma and I volunteered to help the cleaning crew, secretly grateful for the excuse to linger. We moved through the space collecting abandoned programs, stealing glances at each other across the room. When the final caterer left, we found ourselves alone in the dimly lit office. The city sparkled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting soft patterns across the carpet. Emma crossed the room and pulled me close, her hand settling on my chest. "You just risked everything for us," she whispered. I shook my head, touching her cheek. "No, I chose what mattered most." When we kissed this time, it was different from Chicago, deeper, certain, without the weight of uncertainty between us. The security lights dimmed to their nighttime setting, throwing long shadows across empty desks. "I'm tired of being careful," Emma said softly, "of pretending not to care in meetings." We gathered our things unhurried, neither wanting the night to end. In the elevator, Emma looked up at me. "Your place or mine?" she asked quietly. "Mine's closer," I offered. Her smile was small but certain. "I've always wondered what your apartment looked like." The scent of coffee pulled me from sleep, a domestic aroma I wasn't used to waking to. Padding into my kitchen, I found Emma wearing my white button-down from last night, the hem falling to her thighs as she moved between stove and counter. She hummed something gentle while scrambling eggs, morning sun streaming through the windows and catching those little silver bird earrings she'd left on my nightstand. When she heard my nightstand, when she heard my eyes, and catching those little silver bird earrings she'd left on my nightstand. When she heard my nightstand, when she heard my sun streaming through the windows. Footsteps. She turned with a smile I'd never seen at work. Shy, unguarded, worlds away from her boardroom confidence. We took our breakfast out to my small balcony, the morning air still cool. Between bites, we talked through Monday's HR meeting, this new reality we'd chosen. "I'm keeping my apartment for now," she said softly. "While we figure this out, I need some independence." I nodded, understanding her practicality even as part of me wished she'd stay. She kissed me goodbye, tasting of coffee and promise, heading home to change. After she left, I noticed all my coffee mugs lined up by size, her unconscious organizing at work. I couldn't stop smiling at this small claiming of my space. 6 months can change everything. Standing in the gallery, surrounded by Emma's stunning cityscapes, I watched her explain her work to potential buyers, her passion radiating brighter than any boardroom presentation I'd ever seen her give. After Marcus's transfer to London, following the harassment investigation, we found our rhythm. Professional distance at work dissolved into genuine intimacy everywhere else. Emma's photography equipment gradually colonized my apartment until we made it official, her moving. It felt like the most natural progression. My nephew started calling her Aunt Emma during our Sunday video calls, making her blush every time. The CEO's wife circled the gallery, purchasing 3 pieces while confiding in me that Emma's talent had been wasted in accounting all along. As we closed up that night, Emma turned to me. "They offered me creative director at that startup," she said quietly. "What do you think?" I pulled her close. "Take it. We don't need the same building anymore. We've got something better." She squeezed my hand as we locked up, ready for whatever came next. If this story found you at the right time, subscribe and set reminders. Tomorrow's might be the nudge, the hug, or the promise you've been waiting for.